the true life of young male slaves in ancient Rome. His small hands were calloused from working the soil with his father, and his feet knew every stone in the path. But today, something felt wrong. From the edge of the village came the sound of shouting. Horses neighed and the thundering of hooves grew louder with each passing moment. Lucius' mother grabbed his hand. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Lucius could see fear in her eyes, a fear he had never seen before. He wanted to ask why, but words caught in his throat. A group of soldiers rode into the village, their armor shining in the morning light. They were not like the village guards, nor were they men Lucius recognized. They carried ropes and shouted commands in a language that sounded harsh and unkind. Villagers scrambled, trying to hide or flee, but the soldiers moved quickly, rounding up anyone who resisted. Lucius clutched his mother's skirt, but it was too late. A large soldier grabbed him by the arm, lifting him onto the horse. Fear surged through him and he kicked, but his small legs could not escape the firm grip. His mother cried out, but a soldier forced her back. In moments, Lucius was carried away from everything he had ever known. The journey to Rome was long. Lucius sat on the horse, watching the countryside blur past him. His stomach ached and his mind raced with questions. Where was he going? Would he ever see his family again? Around him, other boys and men were also captured. Some cried quietly, some stared silently into the distance, and some, like Lucius, tried to understand what had happened. Rome came into view like a great living mountain of stone and life. The city walls were enormous, and the gates stood tall and imposing. Lucius' heart pounded. He had heard stories of Rome from travelers who passed through his village. They said it was a place of great wealth, incredible buildings, and powerful people, but also a place where a boy like him could become nothing more than a tool. Inside the city, the soldiers handed the captives to men who seemed to be merchants or traders. They examined each boy carefully, checking their teeth, their hands, their muscles. Lucius realized that he was being judged not as a human but as property. The thought made him shiver. "You there," a man barked, pointing at Lucius. "Strong enough for work." "Keep him." Lucius was led to a building filled with other children and teenagers. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and something faintly sweet, perhaps bread baking in the nearby ovens. He was pushed into a corner, surrounded by boys who stared at him with wide eyes. Some looked angry, some scared, but all seemed to understand without speaking. They were in the same situation. Lucius did not speak. He did not know what words could help him here. Instead, he watched. He watched the way the older boys moved, the way they spoke quietly to each other, and the way the merchants counted their coins when taking new arrivals. He realized slowly that understanding was as important as strength in this new world. Days passed. Lucius was assigned to labor, carrying heavy water jars and cleaning floors in a large villa near the city center. The villa belonged to a senator, a man whose robes shimmered with color and whose servants moved with perfect timing. Lucius was careful not to attract too much attention. Every small mistake could bring punishment, but every small act of cleverness could earn a kind word, or at least avoid a harsh one. He observed the other slaves closely. Some were cruel, taking advantage of the weaker boys. Some were kind, offering advice or sharing food when the master was not watching. Lucius quickly learned whom to trust and whom to avoid. He memorized the paths through the villa, the timing of the guards, and the routines of the servants. Even a tiny detail could become a tool if used wisely. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Rome, Lucius found a quiet corner in the servants' quarters. He took out a small piece of chalk he had found earlier and began to scratch marks on the wall. At first, it was just shapes, numbers, and letters he remembered from the few lessons his mother had given him. Then slowly, he began forming plans in his mind. How could he make his work easier? How could he avoid punishment? How could he learn more? Lucius' cleverness did not go unnoticed. A young servant, slightly older than him, began speaking to him quietly. "You watch everything, don't you?" the boy whispered. "You notice things others miss." Lucius nodded, unsure if he should reply. The boy smiled. "Good. That will help you. Rome is big, and there is power in knowing how things work." The days turned into weeks. Lucius became adept at small tasks that others found tedious. Arranging the jars in perfect order, remembering the senator's guests' favorite drinks, and quietly helping the cook without being asked. Each small success built his confidence, and slowly he began to feel that he could survive, even in this harsh place. Yet he never forgot home. At night he would close his eyes and picture the green hills, the warm light of his mother's smile, and the sound of the village river. Those memories gave him strength, reminding him that even though he was a slave in body, his mind and spirit could remain free. One day the senator's son, a boy named Gaius, entered the room where Lucius worked. He was boisterous and impatient, a child used to privilege. He began teasing the other slaves, demanding that they hurry with their chores. Lucius stayed quiet, studying Gaius' movements. He noticed the boy's arrogance, his predictable gestures, and the small signs that betrayed what he wanted before he even spoke. Lucius realized that understanding people could be as powerful as any physical strength. If he could read Gaius, he could protect himself and maybe even gain small advantages. The idea excited him, and he began paying even closer attention, not just to Gaius but to every person in the villa. He understood that this city, this life, was a game of observation and wit, and he intended to play it well. As the first part of Lucius' story drew to a close, he sat on the steps of the villa at twilight, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He felt a mixture of fear and determination. Rome was vast, full of danger but also full of opportunity. And Lucius, small and young though he was, understood one thing clearly. Survival was only the first step. Mastering his world would be the next. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by shadows and the distant sounds of the city, Lucius made a silent promise to himself. He would learn, he would adapt, and one day he would find a way to turn his chains into stepping stones. The sun rose slowly over the city of Rome, casting long shadows across the marble streets. For Lucius, the morning was no longer a time of fear, but of careful observation. After weeks of serving in the senator's villa, he had learned to move quietly, to watch without being noticed, and to remember everything that happened around him. Each day brought new lessons, and Lucius understood that survival required more than strength. It demanded intelligence and patience. Today, he was assigned to help in the senator's kitchen. The kitchen was a world of its own, filled with the smell of roasting meat, the clang of pots and pans, and the constant chatter of cooks and assistants. Lucius observed how the cooks worked, the way they chopped vegetables with precision, the way they timed the roasting of meat, and the small signals they used to communicate without words. One cook, an older man named Marcus, noticed Lucius' careful attention. "You watch well, boy," Marcus said in a low voice as Lucius arranged firewood. "Do you want to learn more than just carrying jars?" Lucius nodded eagerly. Marcus smiled, a rare gesture in a place where harshness was common. "Then you must remember this," he said. "The kitchen is like life. Order brings safety and knowledge brings power." For the next days, Marcus taught Lucius small but important skills. How to balance a tray so it would not tip, how to measure ingredients without spilling, and how to remember orders for dozens of guests. At first, Lucius struggled, dropping cups and spilling flour, but he did not give up. He repeated each task, learning from mistakes, and gradually he became faster and more precise. Lucius discovered that even small successes could earn him trust. The other kitchen slaves began to rely on him. When a tray of wine glasses was about to fall, Lucius caught it in time, saving the servant from punishment. When a loaf of bread burned, he suggested adjusting the oven's heat, which the cook praised. Each time, Lucius felt a small spark of pride. He realized that cleverness could be as valuable as muscle. One evening, after the day's work was done, Marcus brought Lucius to a quiet corner of the kitchen. "Do you see the way the senators and their guests act?" he asked. Lucius nodded. "They follow patterns," Marcus continued. "They think they are clever, but their habits can be predicted. If you watch closely, you can understand them, even control small outcomes." Lucius' eyes widened. He understood that this was more than serving food. It was learning how people thought, learning the unspoken rules of power. Lucius began observing everyone in the villa: the senators, the servants, the guards, and even the children. Each person had a rhythm, a routine, and a weakness. He noticed that the senator often left doors unlocked when he was distracted. He saw that the guards grew tired at the same time each afternoon. He learned when the master of the house was in a good mood and when he was quick to anger. Using this knowledge, Lucius began to make small changes to improve life for himself and the other slaves. He suggested minor adjustments in the kitchen, like arranging ingredients for faster cooking or organizing cleaning schedules. The other slaves noticed, and slowly they began to see him not just as a boy, but as someone reliable, clever, and useful. But Lucius did not stop there. He wanted more knowledge, more understanding. In the villa's library, he discovered scrolls of writing left unattended. Marcus had taught him a little reading, enough to understand letters and simple words. Lucius spent quiet moments deciphering the scrolls, learning about history, philosophy, and strategy. Each new word was a key, unlocking ideas he had never imagined. One afternoon, while organizing dishes in the kitchen, Lucius overheard a conversation between the senator and his steward. They spoke of a shipment of goods arriving from a distant province. The senator worried that rival merchants might try to cheat him. Lucius remembered Marcus' words, "Knowledge brings power." He quietly relayed the information to a trusted kitchen assistant who mentioned it to the steward. The plan was adjusted, and the shipment arrived safely. Lucius felt a thrill of satisfaction. Even as a young slave, he had influence, simply by observing and acting wisely. Life was not without danger. Lucius still witnessed punishments, harsh words, and accidents that could ruin a boy's life. One day, a young slave named Tiberius accidentally dropped a heavy pot, breaking it. The overseer was furious, shouting and threatening to beat him. Lucius acted quickly, offering to help clean up and demonstrating how to prevent the accident from happening again. The overseer calmed down and Tiberius was spared. Lucius realized that quick thinking could save lives, and that courage was not always loud. It could be quiet and clever. Lucius also discovered friendships that mattered. He became close to a few older slaves who shared small secrets, like where to find clean water, which rooftops provided shortcuts, and how to avoid guards' attention. They taught him that loyalty and cooperation were as valuable as wit. Together, they shared stories, lessons, and encouragement. Lucius felt a sense of belonging, even in a city that seemed so large and unfeeling. One evening, the senator's son, Gaius, returned to the villa after a visit to the forum. He was laughing loudly, surrounded by friends, unaware that Lucius was watching carefully. Lucius noticed how Gaius exaggerated stories to impress others, how he ignored smaller children, and how he reacted when his ego was threatened. These small observations became valuable lessons. Lucius began to predict Gaius' moods and desires, which helped him avoid trouble and even assist others in the household. Lucius began to understand that Rome was a game of perception. People valued appearances more than truth. By paying attention, by learning how to read expressions, anticipate reactions, and act wisely, he could survive and even thrive. Each day, he practiced patience and strategy, slowly building a sense of control over his environment. One quiet night, Lucius sat in the courtyard under the stars. He thought of his village, of the fields he had plowed, and the river where he had played as a child. He missed home, but he no longer felt helpless. He had learned that intelligence could be a shield, knowledge could be a weapon, and careful observation could turn danger into opportunity. Someday, he whispered to himself, I will be more than just a boy carrying water. I will understand this city and I will find my place in it. The next morning he rose before the sun. Today he would focus on learning even more. He would watch the guests, listen to the conversations, and practice reading the scrolls in the library. Each small action was a step forward. Lucius realized that the path to freedom, or at least to mastery over his small world, was not through rebellion, but through patience, cleverness, and courage. As he worked in the kitchen, he noticed the patterns again, the rhythm of the cooks, the timing of the guards' patrols, and the subtle signals of the senator's servants. He smiled faintly. He was beginning to understand the hidden language of the villa, a language of power and opportunity that few slaves could ever grasp. And Lucius, small and young though he was determined to master it. For the first time since he had arrived in Rome, Lucius felt a spark of confidence. He was no longer just a frightened boy taken from his village. He was a student of life, a careful observer, and a clever thinker. And in a city full of danger and opportunity, those qualities might one day give him more than just survival. They might give him freedom. And so, as part two of his journey ended, Lucius stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the villa come to life for another day. He had learned the rules, begun to make allies, and discovered the power of knowledge. The city was still vast and intimidating, but he was ready to face it, step by careful step. Rome had taught him one truth. The mind was the greatest weapon, and with it, even a boy could change his destiny. The days in the villa had grown familiar to Lucius, yet he felt a restless energy building inside him. Life in Rome was a constant challenge, but he was no longer the frightened boy who had arrived weeks ago. Now, he had allies among the slaves, he understood the routines of the villa, and he had begun learning from the library scrolls in secret. Knowledge was power, and he intended to use it wisely. One morning, Lucius noticed a commotion near the servant quarters. Tiberius, the young boy he had once saved from punishment, was being scolded harshly by a senior slave overseer. Tiberius had accidentally spilled a container of olives, and the overseer's anger was loud enough to echo through the hallways. Most slaves cowered, afraid to interfere. But Lucius stepped forward quietly, assessing the situation. He remembered the patterns he had learned. The overseer was proud of his control and disliked public mistakes. Lucius whispered a suggestion to Tiberius. Quickly gather the fallen olives and mix them with a few from a nearby shelf, making it seem like a small accident rather than negligence. Tiberius followed the advice, moving swiftly. The overseer noticed the effort and instead of punishment muttered, "Careful next time," and walked away. Lucius felt a small surge of pride. He had intervened without confrontation, using only observation, quick thinking, and logic. It was a reminder that courage did not always mean fighting. It could mean acting smartly when others were too afraid. Tiberius looked at him with admiration, and Lucius realized that leadership was beginning to take root in him. Later that day, Lucius was sent to the villa's stables. The senator kept several horses, and the stables were filled with the scent of hay, leather, and animals. Lucius had never been around horses much, but he had learned quickly. He moved quietly, feeding the animals and observing their behavior. One of the horses, a spirited mare, was restless and difficult to handle. Most of the other stable boys struggled and became frustrated, but Lucius noticed her subtle signals, the flick of her ears, the way she shifted her weight, the rhythm of her breathing. With patience and care, he approached the mare slowly, speaking softly, and eventually guided her to calmness. The head groom noticed. "You have a good eye for them," he said. "Not many can read animals so well." Lucius nodded quietly, Realizing that observation and patience were skills that could extend beyond humans, they applied to every part of life. As the sun reached its highest point, Lucius retreated to a quiet corner of the villa where he had hidden a small pile of scrolls. He had learned enough to read slowly, decoding stories of Roman generals, philosophers, and inventors. Each story sparked ideas in his mind. He began to see connections between the lessons of history and the challenges of his own life. Strategy, patience, and clever thinking were tools he could use every day. That afternoon, the villa prepared for a banquet. Senators, their families, and guests arrived in luxurious robes, carrying gold and silver utensils. Lucius' job was small: serve water and clean spills, but he watched closely, noting the interactions. One guest, a wealthy merchant, spoke harshly to a servant and left his cup of wine dangerously close to the edge of the table. Lucius acted quickly, catching the cup before it fell. The merchant smiled and nodded in approval. It was a tiny victory, but it reminded Lucius that careful action could gain recognition even from the most powerful. In the evening, Lucius returned to the servant quarters. He gathered a few friends in secret, including Tiberius and another boy named Marcellus. "We can help each other," Lucius whispered. "If we work together, we can make life safer and maybe even better." The boys exchanged curious glances. Lucius explained small ideas: how to avoid punishment, how to organize chores more efficiently, and how to notice opportunities without drawing attention. Together, they began to implement these plans. The boys cleaned faster, anticipated the overseer's orders, and helped each other in subtle ways. Life in the villa became smoother for them, and their teamwork grew stronger. Lucius discovered that cooperation, combined with intelligence, could create safety and even influence. It was a small taste of freedom, even within the walls of the villa. One night, as the villa lay quiet, Lucius climbed to the rooftop, looking out over the city of Rome. The streets glimmered with torches and the soft glow of evening fires. He thought of his village, of the hills and rivers he had left behind, but he also thought of the possibilities here. Knowledge, cleverness, and observation were his allies. The city was large, yes, but it was not impossible to understand. A few days later, a new challenge arose. A shipment of food from a distant province was delayed, and the senator grew frustrated. The cooks scrambled to plan meals for the evening banquet, worried that there would not be enough food. Lucius noticed that one of the storerooms contained extra supplies that were not yet organized. Quietly, he suggested to Marcus that they use the hidden stores to prepare some dishes. Marcus followed the advice, and the banquet proceeded without a hitch. The senator's guests were none the wiser, but the smooth operation earned Lucius quiet recognition among the servants. This success reinforced a lesson Lucius had begun to understand: intelligence and initiative were as valuable as strength. By observing, analyzing, and acting thoughtfully, he could influence outcomes. He began thinking about even larger ideas: how he might use his understanding of the villa to help more people, how he might learn from those in power, and how he could continue building his skills. As winter approached, life in the villa grew harsher. The cold made chores more difficult, the guards less patient, and the workload heavier. Lucius, however, used every challenge as an opportunity to improve. He noticed that the guards became careless in the cold, leaving certain doors unlocked. He studied these patterns, storing the knowledge in his mind. Perhaps one day, such information would serve him in a more important way. Lucius also began to notice the value of small kindnesses. When a fellow slave fell ill, he helped quietly, bringing warm water and blankets without drawing attention. When a younger boy dropped a dish, he stepped in to catch it before punishment could come. These acts, small as they were, created trust and loyalty. Lucius understood that influence was not just about cleverness, it was about empathy and respect. One afternoon, as the villa prepared for a festival, a minor crisis occurred. A fire started in one of the storage rooms, threatening to destroy valuable supplies. Panic spread among the servants. Lucius assessed the situation quickly. He noticed that water buckets were near the edge of the courtyard and that some boys were frozen with fear. Taking command quietly, he directed the others to form a line, passing buckets efficiently to douse the flames. Within moments, the fire was under control. The head overseer arrived, surprised to see the fire extinguished so quickly. He looked at Lucius with a mix of disbelief and approval. "Well done, boy," he said. Lucius felt a surge of pride. He had acted decisively, calmly, and effectively. It was a moment that showed him, and the others, that even a young slave could make a difference with intelligence, courage, and leadership. That night, Lucius reflected on the day's events. Rome was vast, and the villa was only a small part of it. Yet within this confined space, he had learned lessons that were far greater than mere survival. Observation, cleverness, patience, teamwork, and empathy, these were the tools that could shape his future. And for the first time, he felt that his life was not entirely controlled by others. He could act, and his actions had meaning. As he lay down to sleep, he thought of his village once more. He missed the fields, the river, and the warmth of his family, but he understood that strength came not from wishing for freedom, but from creating it in whatever form he could. He dreamed of the day when he might step beyond the villa gates, using his mind and courage to shape his destiny. Rome was a city of shadows and opportunity, danger and possibility. And Lucius, small and young though he was, had begun to light sparks of freedom, one careful, clever action at a time. The villa was unusually quiet that morning. The usual bustle of servants and slaves seemed slower, as if the city itself had taken a pause. Lucius felt a strange tension in the air, a ripple of unease that made his skin prick. He had learned to trust such instincts. Something was about to happen. It began in the storeroom. A large crate marked with the senator's seal had been dropped during the unloading of a shipment. The wood cracked, and the contents, precious oils and jars of wine, spilled onto the floor. The overseer of the storeroom, a stern man named Quintus, arrived and immediately blamed the young slaves. Voices rose and fear spread among those nearby. Many froze, unsure of what to do, knowing that any mistake could bring harsh punishment. Lucius acted quickly. He remembered the layout of the storeroom and the location of the extra crates, the timing of the guards' patrols, and the precise sequence in which the supervisors counted the goods. He began to organize the boys, directing them to stack the remaining crates safely, clean the broken jars, and recover what could be saved. "Move quickly, but carefully," he shouted, his voice steady. The other boys, inspired by his calm determination, obeyed. Lucius moved among them, demonstrating the safest way to lift crates, where to place the jars, and how to avoid injury. His instructions were clear, precise, and confident. Slowly, panic began to fade, replaced by organized action. The overseer Quintus looked around, his eyes narrowing. "You boy," he said, pointing at Lucius. "What are you doing? This is not your work." Lucius met his gaze steadily. "We are preventing further loss, sir. If we act quickly, nothing else will break and the shipment can still be counted accurately." Quintus hesitated. He was not used to young slaves speaking with such confidence. After a tense moment, he shrugged. "Very well, but if this fails, it will be your fault." Lucius nodded and returned to directing the others. He noticed that some boys were struggling with heavy crates. Using clever leverage with ropes and careful placement of wooden planks, he guided them to move the crates more efficiently. Within an hour, the storeroom was organized, the broken jars accounted for, and the shipment ready to be counted. The senator himself arrived shortly afterward, summoned by the steward to inspect the situation. Lucius observed carefully, noting the senator's expressions, the slight twitch of his hands, and the way his eyes scanned the room. When the senator approached, he looked at the organized crates and then at Lucius. "Who managed this?" the senator asked. The overseer stepped forward, trying to claim responsibility, but the steward interrupted. "The boy, sir. He directed the other slaves and prevented greater loss." The senator raised an eyebrow, studying Lucius for a long moment. "Impressive," he said finally. Not many would have handled this so calmly. "Well done." Lucius felt a rush of pride, but he did not let it show too much. He had learned that humility was also a form of power. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. The crisis was over for now, but Lucius knew that life in the villa was full of challenges, each more complex than the last. The incident had taught him a valuable lesson. Courage alone was not enough. One needed intelligence, observation, leadership, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. That evening, Lucius gathered Tiberius and Marcellus in their usual quiet corner. "We did well today," he said, "but we must learn from what happened. Danger can come at any moment. If we are prepared, we can turn it into opportunity instead of disaster." The boys listened carefully. Lucius explained his reasoning. How understanding patterns, learning the routines of the overseers and guards, and acting quickly with intelligence could save not just themselves, but others as well. It was more than survival, it was influence, the ability to make choices even in a constrained life. A few days later, another challenge arose, this time from the political world. A visiting magistrate had come to inspect the senator's property, checking for irregularities in accounting, storage, and management. Most slaves panicked, fearing that any small mistake could bring punishment. Lucius, however, observed quietly from a distance. He noticed that the magistrate followed certain predictable steps. He checked the storerooms first, then the records, and finally questioned the overseers. Lucius whispered instructions to Tiberius and Marcellus. "Stay calm, follow my lead. Observe what the magistrate does and be ready to correct mistakes quietly." Together, the three boys moved through the villa, ensuring that everything appeared in order. When a spilled jar threatened to draw attention, Lucius discreetly replaced it. When a stack of scrolls was slightly out of place, he adjusted them. The magistrate observed, but nothing seemed wrong. By the end of the day, the inspection was complete. The magistrate left, satisfied, and the overseers praised the efficiency of the work. Lucius had acted behind the scenes, unnoticed by most, but his careful planning and foresight had averted disaster. He understood that real influence often came not from recognition, but from action. As the weeks passed, Lucius' confidence grew. He began to teach younger boys small lessons in observation, organization, and strategy. He showed them how to anticipate problems, avoid mistakes, and support each other. The villa was still a place of hierarchy and strict rules, but within their small group, Lucius created a space where knowledge and cleverness mattered more than brute strength. One evening, a fire broke out in the kitchen, caused by a candle falling near the oil jars. Panic spread quickly. Lucius' mind raced. He remembered the layout, the location of the water buckets, and the positions of the other slaves. He directed them to form a line and pass water efficiently. He moved calmly among them, checking that everyone followed instructions and preventing accidents. Within minutes, the flames were extinguished and no one was hurt. The head cook, Marcus, placed a hand on Lucius' shoulder. "You saved many today," he said. Lucius nodded silently, feeling the weight of responsibility. It was not glory he sought. It was mastery over circumstance, the ability to act when others hesitated. He had learned that leadership could come from anyone, regardless of age or status, if one combined knowledge, courage, and careful action. The senator noticed Lucius more often now. He saw a boy who moved quietly, observed carefully, and acted decisively. It was unusual, and yet valuable. Lucius had become someone the adults could trust in moments of crisis. He realized that Rome was not only a place of danger, but also a place where intelligence and courage could be rewarded, even in a boy who had arrived as a captured child. As winter approached, Lucius reflected on how far he had come. From a frightened village boy to a young slave capable of influencing outcomes, he had learned patience, observation, cleverness, and leadership. He had discovered that even in the harshest conditions, one could find ways to act, to help others, and to build a reputation. Sitting quietly in the courtyard one night, he thought of his village, the river, and the fields he had loved. He realized that freedom was not just about leaving the villa. It was about mastering oneself, learning how to act wisely, and finding ways to shape the world, even in small ways. And in that moment, under the cold stars of Rome, Lucius made another silent promise. He would continue to learn, continue to grow, and one day, he would use his knowledge, courage, and cleverness to shape his destiny far beyond the walls of the villa. Rome had tested him, and he had risen to meet its challenges. The turning point had come, and Lucius knew that the greatest trials and greatest opportunities were still ahead. The sun rose slowly over Rome, casting a golden glow across the villa rooftops. Lucius stood quietly at the edge of the courtyard, watching the servants and slaves begin their daily routines. The city had become familiar to him, not as a place of fear, but as a landscape full of challenges, lessons, and possibilities. Over the months, he had learned more than he could have imagined: patience, observation, cleverness, and leadership. Yet a quiet hope stirred in his heart. One day he would be free, and he would use everything he had learned to shape his own destiny. The morning began like any other. Lucius assisted in the kitchen, observing the rhythm of the cooks and guards, ensuring the tasks of the day flowed smoothly. But there was a tension in the air, a feeling that today would not be ordinary. A group of merchants arrived, carrying letters and documents from distant provinces. The senator examined the papers with a frown, and Lucius noticed the weight of the news in his gestures. Something important was at stake. The senator called a meeting of his household, including overseers and senior servants. Lucius watched quietly from a corner, observing carefully. The senator spoke of disputes over land and trade agreements. Mistakes or delays could result in significant financial loss, and tensions were high. Lucius recognized the signs of stress: a hand that trembled slightly, a brow furrowed, a voice pitched higher than normal. He realized that even small actions could prevent mistakes. As the day unfolded, Lucius noticed a small error in the ledger, an overlooked shipment that, if unaddressed, could create a major problem. He knew that speaking out carried risk. A young slave pointing out a mistake could be punished if it offended the overseers or the senator. But Lucius had learned to act carefully, weighing risk and strategy. He approached Marcus, the trusted cook and his mentor. "Sir, if I may," Lucius said quietly, "there is a shipment in the storeroom that has not been counted properly. If we check it, it could prevent trouble later." Marcus glanced at him, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Then he nodded. "Good eye, Lucius. Let us handle it carefully." Together, they organized a small team of trustworthy slaves, quietly inspecting the shipment and ensuring the records were corrected before the senator noticed. The problem was resolved seamlessly, without blame or punishment, and the senator praised the household for their diligence. Lucius felt a quiet satisfaction. He had prevented disaster through careful observation, courage, and action. That evening, Lucius gathered his small group: Tiberius, Marcellus, and a few other boys who had become his allies. "We have done well," he said. "But remember, freedom is more than avoiding mistakes. It is about learning, preparing, and making the right choices when the time comes." The boys listened intently. Lucius had become a teacher as well as a leader, sharing his knowledge to help others navigate the harsh realities of the villa. Winter turned to spring, and Lucius continued to grow. His skills extended beyond observation and problem-solving. He had learned reading and writing, basic arithmetic, and even simple engineering from the scrolls he studied in secret. He helped organize tasks for the household, guided younger boys, and quietly influenced decisions without attracting unwanted attention. Slowly, he became respected by both slaves and overseers, not for strength, but for intelligence, reliability, and courage. One morning, news arrived that changed everything. The senator had decided to grant freedom to a select few slaves who had demonstrated exceptional service, cleverness, and loyalty. Lucius was summoned, along with a few others, to the main hall. His heart pounded as he stepped forward, unsure what to expect. The senator regarded him thoughtfully. "Lucius," he said, "you have shown not only skill and diligence, but intelligence, courage, and leadership beyond your years. You have managed challenges that many adults could not. I see potential in you, and I grant you freedom." Lucius felt a rush of emotions: joy, disbelief, and relief. He had dreamed of freedom, but now it was real. He bowed respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I will honor this gift with care and wisdom." The next days were filled with preparations for his departure from the villa. Lucius said quiet goodbyes to friends, mentors, and allies he had made along the way. Tiberius hugged him tightly. "You have taught me so much," he said. "I will remember your lessons always." Lucius smiled, realizing that leadership and guidance could leave a mark long after someone departed. On the morning of his freedom, Lucius stepped through the villa gates, carrying nothing but a small satchel of possessions and the lessons he had learned. The city of Rome stretched before him, vast and full of possibility. The streets were busy with merchants, senators, and citizens moving about their daily lives. Lucius had walked these streets countless times as a slave, but now he saw them with new eyes, not as a place of danger, but as a canvas for opportunity. He walked slowly, observing everything as he had done for months. Patterns were clear to him now: the timing of the markets, the flow of traffic, the way people reacted to news and events. His mind raced with possibilities. He could work, learn, and build a life of his own choosing. He could use intelligence, observation, and careful action to navigate the city and achieve success. In the evenings, Lucius found quiet spots to study further. He read scrolls at the market, spoke with merchants and scholars, and absorbed lessons from anyone willing to share knowledge. He realized that freedom was not just the absence of chains, it was the ability to act, to think, and to shape one's own path. Over time, Lucius began to make a small name for himself. He helped merchants organize their records, advised on trade routes, and assisted in resolving disputes. His reputation for cleverness, honesty, and reliability grew. People began to trust him, and he found that influence could be earned without force or fear, simply through skill, wisdom, and integrity. Yet, he never forgot the villa or the friends he had left behind. He sent messages and small gifts to Tiberius and Marcellus, encouraging them to continue learning and using their cleverness to improve their lives. He understood that true success was not just personal, but also the ability to help others rise. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills surrounding Rome, Lucius climbed to a small rooftop overlooking the city. The light glinted off the marble buildings, the streets glowed with torchlight, and the river shimmered like silver in the distance. He thought of his journey from a frightened village boy to a clever, observant, and courageous young man. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, but he had learned patience, strategy, and empathy. He had discovered that the mind could be a greater weapon than strength, and that courage could be quiet and deliberate. Lucius smiled to himself. Freedom was no longer a dream, it was reality. But more than that, he understood that life itself was a journey of learning and action. Each challenge was an opportunity to grow, each decision a chance to shape the future. Rome, vast and complicated as it was, had taught him that nothing was beyond reach for those willing to think, observe, and act wisely. He looked down at the streets below and saw children running, merchants calling out their goods, and citizens moving about their lives. He remembered his own childhood in the village, the river, and the hills, and he realized that while his past had shaped him, it did not define him. The future was his to build, guided by intelligence, courage, and careful action. Lucius turned away from the rooftop, walking down into the city with purpose. Each step was confident, measured, and thoughtful. He had learned to master small worlds, and now he was ready to face larger ones. He carried the lessons of survival, leadership, and ingenuity with him, knowing that life would continue to challenge him, but that he was ready. Rome stretched before him like a vast puzzle, full of possibilities. Lucius had been a boy in chains, but he had become a young man with knowledge, courage, and freedom. And as he moved through the city, he knew one truth clearly. The mind and spirit could overcome any obstacle, and with them, a human could rise above circumstance to shape a destiny of their own choosing. And so, with the warm sun on his face and the bustling city at his feet, Lucius walked forward into a future he would build for himself, guided by the lessons of the past and the limitless possibilities of freedom.